Well, greetings to all of you out there in Substack world, all of you followers, subscribers, free and paid, friends near and far. This is Scott Spradlin. I'm recording this video at the world headquarters for North Star Therapy in Wichita, Kansas. Also, the world headquarters for Wichita DBT. Also, the world headquarters for Wise Mind for the Distracted Mind, the North Star Therapy DBT program adapted for adult ADHD, for which there is a forthcoming companion workbook, which we have been discussing in a few videos and we continue to discuss today in this particular video. And this is a wrap up. This is part two of leftover from yesterday. What is DBT and why can it be helpful for ADHD? I am going to do a bit of a bridging between the last video, part one, and part two, this video here, real quick, because we're just giving a thumbnail sketch of dialectical behavior therapy. As we said in the last video, this is a therapy that was developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan, who really brought a sea change of effective treatment to those with profound emotional suffering, in particular, persons who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder and who are chronically suicidal and often self-harming persons. And as an effective therapy, as a therapy that has repeated random controlled trials for outcomes, and also just I think the worldwide embrace of dialectical behavior therapy shows that it is an effective therapy for those who struggle with profound emotional vulnerability, issues with impulsivity and behavioral control, and related to all of that are difficulties with attentional regulation. How do we pay attention? How do we think? And all of these are related. We're a whole person, so our thoughts, our attention, right? How we pay attention, where our attention goes, is influenced by and also influences our emotions and certain physiological states, as well as vice versa. They're all interconnected, they're all interrelated, they're all part of a recursive system. They're part of us as persons. And so after DBT had been established as an effective psychotherapy and found to be an evidence-based treatment by the American Psychological Association, others began to adapt DBT, pulling from some of the principles, noticing, for example, in the case of ADHD, Alexandra Philipson and Hesslinger, whom we referenced in the last video, German researchers and practitioners were the first to really pioneer looking at adapting DBT for adult ADHD, in part because there were some striking similarities and parallels between borderline personality disorder and adult ADHD. Along those lines, we found that there are, in fact, difficulties for ADHD adults regulating their emotions. There's an underlying vulnerability for us ADHD adults. Don't forget, I'm one of them. So I also know this from firsthand experience. And there is a proclivity for, perhaps a vulnerability toward dysphoric states, which serve to throw some interference for one's ability to pay attention in a way of self-acting, self-regulating, goal-directed behaviors. And so sometimes these dysregulated mood states and emotional states are part of what get us off track and move us away from those important tasks we need to achieve daily as well as weekly and over the course of our life, relationships and otherwise, all that stuff, right? And so Mariah and I have pulled from the research that we have access to. We're clinicians, so we try to look at the research with the eyes of clinicians and try to judiciously hold on to the cores, the essential pieces of DBT so that we don't do violence to DBT as a model, modifying it in such a way that it will be helpful to ourselves and by extension our patients and clients who are also ADHD adults. And so we have certainly read the literature from from Alexandra Philipson and from Hesslinger and a host of others And sometime we'll post a bibliography for those of you who want to do some research or see who those early researchers were and who are the current researchers. This has been going on for decades. um, and so much of our work is influenced by what they've done, as well as others in the ADHD field, specifically like Russell Barkley, Russell Ramsey, Thomas Brown, and so on. More recently, I'd say Lydia Zylowska, I'd say Rothstein, colleague to Ramsey, Ari Tucker, and so forth. They have been very influential in how we approach ADHD, understanding executive function challenges, and then looking at the systematic panoply of skills that DBT has to offer to adults with ADHD. And so we looked yesterday at, just that overview of the menu of options, kind of the big bullet points would be DBT offers mindfulness skills, which can in fact help us strengthen activating attention and working with limitations of cognitive load, as well as catching ourselves when we are distracted. And mindfulness as a head, shoulders, knees, and toes practice helps us also to cultivate not only a general awareness of ourselves in the moment as we're connected to our environments, so we can see how we are influencing those around us in our work and home and school, for better or for worse, so we can be more effective and hopefully alter our behaviors accordingly in a way so that we can act wisely toward what we value and cherish and not be lost too long in our ADHD dysphoria, twirling, or other ADHD crises. We also have distress tolerance skills, and those set of skills are really aimed at helping individuals learn how to bear emotional pain skillfully, how to get through high pressure crisis moments without making situations worse. For ADHD adults, there are a number of crises that they face which may not be on par with a life threatening emergency, but there are other chronic crises that show up, for instance, being presented an option for a special sale on something that there really shouldn't be money spent on, but then it activates that impulse. Maybe the dopamine gets activated, and then now there's a strong urge and attraction for something, which overall could be something that maybe would be better purchased later or not at all if we can wait. And there may be pressure about that, or the purchase may be made, which then in turn creates a financial vulnerability and makes the rest of life more stressful and vulnerable to stress because it's difficult to pay the rent or electric bill and so on, or to save money for older age. Very difficult things for ADHD adults to do. ADHD adults also battle with, as do a lot of folks, battle with willfulness. This is part of distress tolerance. We'll say more about it later because we've got a whole 2 chapters in this workbook about distress tolerance. There's a lot to say about the crisis survival skills on the one hand, and then the radical acceptance skills, and also the practice of willingness over willfulness. And so, willingness helps us to step into this participatory practices of the DBT skills in such a way as where we can offload some personal shame, offload or mitigate some of the internalized invalidation that we may be holding on to from negative feedback we've received over the years from our environments. And willingness helps us to soften so that we can hear feedback that may be helpful and to hear it with wisdom rather than hostility and defensiveness. We can learn from it. Willingness also helps us to open our hearts and minds toward doing just what is needed in a given situation, no more or no less. And can also open us up to the way in which we're connected with others with whom we may be feeling hostile or defensive. So it's our set of tools that help us to learn how to bear our emotional pain skillfully. Mm. A sip of coffee from my 8th Day Books bookstore coffee mug. That's the mug of the day. So if you're ever in Wichita or you're online, check out Wichita's favorite bookstore, at least my favorite bookstore, 8th Day Books. They don't even know I'm doing this, so I'm not getting kickback, but you really do owe it to yourself to check it out. And if you're ever in Wichita, be sure to go visit. It's also the emotion regulation skill, something that ADHD adults very much need. As we said yesterday, the emotion regulation skills, as we put them out in the workbook, of course, bringing in traditional DBT practices, a few fine tunings, perhaps some of our own nuance, that we're trying to show folks how they can befriend their emotions. How do ADHD adults befriend their emotions? Understanding, for example, what emotions are for, what they do for us, how they're fundamentally adaptive. And sometimes that's an eye opener to our ADHD adults are surprised. Emotions are helpful. Yes, they can be helpful. And sometimes we may be in fight, flight, or freeze, or we may be overreactive, maybe teetering toward, or we may be outright emotionally dysregulated, in which case we may need to start with some distress tolerance skills to bring down the temperature. But as we continue to practice emotion regulation skills, befriending emotions by learning to label them as we understand that they are, in fact, giving us information, they're also motivating constructive behavior often, but also being able to discern when they are perhaps driving us towards something that is not useful, something that may be temporarily detrimental or uh, ineffective in the moment, so that we may choose otherwise, in which case we might use our opposite to emotion action skills. We'll say more about opposite action in later videos, and of course you can read all about it in this new workbook we have coming out. And we also think it's important that ADHD adults learn to build emotional resilience. As we said in the last video, also, there's an alarming statistic about ADHD adults, and that is that they have a shorter lifespan by up to 15 years, shorter than those who do not meet criteria for ADHD. Lots of reasons for that. We're not going to go to all the reasons here, but we'll get into those later. But the main point I would like to make here on that front is emotion regulation skills help you to, again, on the one hand, befriend your emotions, so you understand them more, so you can see what they're doing for you, how they're hardwired into you and can organize you for effective action. And on the other hand, you also need to learn how to build emotional resilience. This is, if we're not sleeping at night, and overwhelmed by all of our financial troubles, relationship troubles, we're disappointing people on a regular basis, and we don't have other skills to mitigate just even sort of the sense of our own relationship with our emotions and ourselves and all of this, we can get lost in this kind of self-enclosed world of suffering and shame. And we may project a kind of competence out here from others, but beneath that is somebody who's really struggling to uh, live a life worth living and to live by their values, have some self mastery, and so on. So we promote the practices of radical self care, which in traditional DBT will come up in the please skills. So for those of you watching who know your DBT, those would be the traditional skills. For the workbook, we are using an acronym developed by our colleague Dick Watson, who's in Maine, using the Be Strong acronym. And we'll say more about that later, but it's kind of positive and empowering and bringing something hopefully that will help ADHD adults anchor their memory to these skills. But we all need sleep. We need appropriate sleep. We all need to take medications as prescribed. We need to treat physical illnesses as they come up. We need to resist intoxicants that ultimately make life more complicated, because that can interrupt sleep and serve as avoidance from being able to develop emotional resilience and so on. It may harm us in other physical ways that may not be super abundantly clear initially, but even some substances that we use on a frequent basis, it is can add up, has a cumulative effect, and often to our detriment. Exercise is radically important. Also, sleep and exercise are two super important areas of life we really got to get a handle on. You don't have to be an Olympian or professional athlete. We might be talking about walking every day. We might be talking about doing some jumping jacks and squats and push-ups in your living room. We might be talking about getting some exercise equipment in your house or visiting your local Y. or joining a class or taking yoga, anything to strengthen the body, to help you transport and facilitate oxygen around your body. Very helpful for executive functions, which are very impaired in ADHD, and also very protective for your overall health. And also, when we keep some structure, even around the practice of exercise, well, that helps increase our self respect as we increase self mastery. The final set of traditional skills you'll find in the workbook coming out of DBT are the interpersonal effectiveness skills, summed up in the acronym Dear Man, Give Fast. We will unpack that later also. Dear Man, Give Fast can help us to ask others to help us make requests and practice scheme with fluctuating intensity that match the moment and situation in the relationship. We can also use those skills to say no, set or observe limits in our life and being able to say no. ADHD adults, in my personal experience, anecdotally speaking, are famous for going with the flow and engaging in lots of over deference to others, hyper deferentiality even, and they have difficulty saying no, which then complicates their social calendar and their obligations, and they can't keep track of it all. Invariably, they let others down, but they're also missing out on letting others know their own preferences, whether that's for music or activities or food or the way they dress and where they live. These are very important also. And then the other skills give and fast focus on how can I talk differently with people that I care about? How can I be more gentle and validating? How can I also do all of these things while shoring up my self respect, knowing that I am acting within my relationships in a fashion that align with my wise mind values, the way I want to interact with others, being intentional with them in shared presence and acting accordingly to whether that's a teacher student relationship or spouse relationship or family, friends, so on. Very important. Now, the end here of I want to get to with this video, sharing a little bit from the closing of the second chapter of the workbook. Sorry, the first chapter of the workbook, little statement about wise mind and a life worth living. In helping ADHD adults cultivate a life worth living, it is undoubtedly important that we ADHD adults become wiser as goes efficiency. Wiser as goes efficiency. Keeping promises that we make, keeping promises to ourselves, knowing where our things are, knowing what our deadlines are, understanding that uh, chronos and calendar, clock and calendar under chronos and chronology is important to help everybody uh, work together in life and to meet for coffee and dinner, to pay bills, to engage in commerce, to sleep and wake up and other cycles, that sort of thing. And then we have the kairos time also, which is the opportune time, borrowing these words from the Greek, being mindful to seize opportunities to connect with children, with our children, or our partners, or friends, or to get a task done when we suddenly get time available. Oh no, this is a great time to finally put the laundry away. It could happen. It does happen sometimes, believe it or not. But beyond the efficiency piece, that's not enough to have a life worth living. We also find that it's important that we cultivate wisdom. And so we take DBT Wise Mind, we will say more about that, and we're expanding that a little bit in terms of taking this from a construction in DBT, which is kind of a state of mind that we can go to where we can access our own inner wisdom, where we're balancing our reason and emotion, often accessing intuition as we not only integrate our reason and emotion, but we transcend them. Then we find that we know how to live as human beings when we're paying attention. And paying attention doesn't always mean laser focus on a particular task. We need that sometimes. But we also need to pay attention to our health and again, our fittedness in the world around us and whether or not we are loving well. Are we being loved? Are we engaging in activities that connect us with community or meaningful activities that give us a sense of richness and meaning and connection? Right? Okay. So, my loquacious introduction yet again. Thanks for hanging in there, viewers. So, a little statement here on wise mind and life worth living that you'll find in this wonderful new dialectical behavior therapy skills workbook for adult ADHD. So, we say this: a common struggle for us ADHD adults is a tendency toward all or nothing thinking, feeling, and acting. When we commit ourselves to action, we often confuse perfectionism with commitment. And throwing yourself into activities with demanding aggression is not the same as mindful participation. We must be able to distinguish between aggression and participation. Aggression is a tight fisted and tends toward control. Participation involves open handed receptivity that allows us to dance rather than to conquer. And participation is more playful and more sustainable. And the overarching goal is to help you become a more skillful in mitigating your ADHD EFIs, your executive function impairments, in the service of your deepest values and the development of what is most precious to you. On this note, we invite you to pause and reflect on and write out who and what is precious to you, your values, which inform you and shape your life, which shape your life worth living goals, and they energize your aspirations. When you don't know what's important to you, you may often feel as though you're flailing through life as you misalign your behaviors with distractions and impulsivity. The more you live in alignment with your values, the more likely you are to experience meaning and satisfaction. Each value aligned action becoming a piece of the larger mosaic of your life worth living. With that, I'll close this video out. Thanks again for watching. Be mindful out there.